Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. Joining me is Stephanie Goodman, founder of Golden Agreements, a service devoted to helping families navigate the complexities of aging with grace, clarity, and compassion. With over 2 decades of experience in family support and elder care, Stephanie is passionate about creating space for honest conversations, those difficult but necessary talks that allow families to honor their loved ones' independence, dignity, and deeply held wishes. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the uncertainty around your parents' care, unsure how to begin planning, or afraid of the hard conversations that aging demands, this episode will offer not only empathy, but also practical tools and hope for the journey ahead. Stephanie, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I wanted you to begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself and really what inspired you to create Golden Agreements, and what need were you seeing in families that led you to this creation?
Thank you. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting me on. I started this company just this year, but I've actually been in this situation for more than 20, where I've been helping families, helping my own family, the process of planning for aging. We spend a lot of time thinking about estate planning for after we're gone. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to extend our lives and how to live quality lives with supplements and with exercise and things like that. But we spend a lot less time thinking about the people who are going to be on the journey with us all the way to the end. My father was diagnosed with ALS in the early 2000s. He passed in 2004, and that started my journey. So I've really been at this for over 25 years. And in the process, I also started a women's group called Project Refined. And so I meet with many women in my age range. We're all dealing with the same things. We are raising our families and we are watching our parents age. And the struggles and the difficulties are universal. So we really hone in on how to age, how to go through the journey, not just for our parents, but for ourselves. And it's really a rethink of how we look at aging rather than the crisis management that tends to be the cornerstone of how we look at aging today.
So how do you define aging well?
For me, aging well is the ability to be independent, the ability to chase your dreams and be surrounded with the people who love you so that you're not doing it alone.
That's aging well. That's pretty much how we define it here, I think. So what are some of the most common struggles you see with families as they're facing trying to navigate aging together?
Let's do a quick history lesson. Really, today, everybody wants to do what's called age in place. That means live in their homes alone, independently, with their dignity, doing exactly what they want to do, all the way until the time that they pass. But that's a really relatively new phenomenon, because if you go back to the early 1900s, we were still living together in multigenerational families. We were still living in the same neighborhoods. We were watching out for our aging elders, and we knew what their needs were, and we were taking care of them. And there weren't even as many people and options to be a part of it. So it was really relied on the family. And then throughout the 1900s, with industrialization and urbanization and people moving around the country, we left our family units. And in response to that, we saw institutional support. We saw aging homes, nursing homes, we saw communities, retirement communities pop up, where some of those support systems were built into the new systems. And then with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, people could afford more of that. So those really proliferated. And really, if you look at the Census Bureau, it wasn't until about the mid-1980s that we invented this idea that we're going to live in place, we're going to age in place, and we're going to do it ourselves all the way to the end. And so if you look at it as about a 45-year-old phenomenon, you can see why we are in a situation where people are in crisis. And the fallout, to your question about what's the greatest challenge, is I see families being divided. I see nightmare scenarios where people are not experiencing the outcomes that they hoped for with their loved one because they hadn't planned to go through this journey in a way that they were genuinely supported and the family understood. Everybody was rowing in the same direction, basically. Mm-hmm. That's a really new concept to aging in place, and very few people do that.
So how do you define a golden agreement, and why is this such a powerful tool for aging well?
A golden agreement is essentially a family contract, and it's a very specific family contract where we go through and look at critical elements need to be defined, hopefully well ahead of the crisis, to make sure that we actually have a plan. I liken it to if you're going to have a child, you have some version of a birth plan. You go to a Lamaze class, you go to a breastfeeding class, perhaps you make a nursery, you arrange your childcare, you get the accoutrements for your house, the stroller, all the parts and pieces that you think will help you go through that life transition planned for. Does it always go according to plan? Absolutely not. But it doesn't make the plan any less valuable or necessary to go into that life transition. And so for me, golden agreements are those same planning tools. Typically, you've got the two parents who are on the same page about who's going to do which responsibilities. How are we going to handle this baby? How are we going to manage our life through this transition? And aging really has to be thought of the same way, rather than as a solo, independent journey, because that really does not serve you well if you plan to be with the people you love in a really harmonious way through life.
So we hear a lot about the sandwich generation, where we have, people that are kind of involved in their careers and they're taking care of maybe their own kids, but then they also now have to, because like myself, I'm an older parent. I had my kids when I was in my early 40s. So now at 62, they're just now entering college, which, I think back, it's like when my dad was 62, I think that's about when I was that's when I started having the kids. And, we hear about the sandwich generation. Are you seeing that occurring more, that kids are being willing, or maybe it's more forced into taking care of their parents? Are they doing it willingly, or is this, something that is causing some of the friction in these families?
That's really a great question. There's a little bit of a chicken and the egg on this one. First of all, our generation, we did not invent AIDS. What's been going on forever. All that's really changed is our expectation of how we can do things. And this sense of independence is what we see in this aging in place. So what's forgotten in the aging in place mentality is there's really 4 critical key elements that need to be in place to be successful, so that it isn't a burden on our children, or it isn't a burden on us if we're caring for our parents. The first is home readiness. If you are living in a 2-story home and your bedroom is upstairs, the day is going to come where going up those stairs is probably going to be a challenge. Likelihood is, anyway. There will be a few people who can manage that. But is the house appropriate? Have safety measures been taken to create a safe home for that person to be able to live there? Have you installed grab rails in the bathroom? Have you done the lighting? Even as we age, at our age, we should be doing little things along the way that keep us safer, more convenience. Maybe your eyes aren't as good as they once were. Maybe you need to improve the lighting. There are steps all along the way that we can be taking. So home readiness, that can be a barrier to aging in place. Financial constraints. There's a lot of cost associated with staying alone. And when I say alone, I don't mean that aren't people living in your house. I mean, aging in place is a commitment to living independently through the rest of your life. That can be very expensive. Health issues and the need for care can exceed what can happen in a house. And then you need to really consider other living situations, or you need to consider bringing help into the house. That also has all kinds of barriers to entry in certain situations. And then lastly, there's a lack of social support. There's an isolation that happens when you choose to age in place. So it's really up to your family to address those 4 issues, because as you age, your capacity to genuinely understand what your needs are, be proactive to make sure those needs are being met, it's diminished. We know that's part of aging. It's okay. It doesn't mean you've lost your mind. It doesn't mean you have dementia. We just know that's part of aging. Eventually, you're going to need support. So aging in place, 85% of all adults currently tell AARP that's what they plan to do. That really requires a plan. So the sandwich generation is really saying, this is a bigger burden than I thought. So with appropriate planning, which is what Golden Agreements does, we spread out all of those responsibilities amongst the family and loved ones. We really identify who's going to do what. And then what does it mean? If you have the financial power of attorney for somebody, what does that mean while they're alive? Not just at the very end of their life, but how do you support them throughout their aging journey? So it's not dramatic. So it's not difficult when the time comes. There's so many planning steps you can do to be able to support your loved one, both in health, in finances, in safety, in social. So we really look at all of those aspects and we spread out. We divide the responsibilities, and we make sure that the person we're planning for, the golden client, knows who to turn to when they need support, because that's also, with dignity, often a problem. They don't want to say, I need help. They say, nope, I got this. I got this. I don't need any help. But the truth is, we all need the help. And if we want to be with the people we love at the end of our life, we have to include them in our journey.
So why do so many families avoid these conversations until there's a crisis?
I think I've heard a lot of really heartfelt explanations to that question, but most of them really don't stand up to the test of reality. One of them is, I love this one. I'm afraid if I talk about dying, I will die. Okay. I'm pretty sure we're all going to meet that death anyway. We're all going to get there anyway. I don't think talking about it expedites it. One of the great paradoxes is that actually the better we plan for aging, the better we do at aging. And that's, you're preaching that, you're talking about that all the time on this podcast. Plan for it. Plan for the exercise, plan for the healthy eating, plan for the sleeping, plan for the fall prevention. All of these planning exercises will improve the quality of your life. But what we don't talk about is how to include the people we love, because it is a sense of giving up our independence, and nobody wants to give up their independence. I understand that. And let me just follow up with one other thought on that. The common saying is that you end up parenting, the parent-child role becomes reversed. Right now, you're parenting your parent. I cannot say more emphatically, turn that one on its head. You are not parenting you are evolving your relationship to give them the kind of support and love that they gave you. But that is not the same thing as parenting your parent. If it was, then much like when you have a 5-year-old having a tantrum, you'll just tell them what to do and you'll exert that kind of control. But out of respect and love for your parents, there is a way to do this without parenting your parent. And I'll tell everybody, goldenagreements.com, we have articles. They're all free. I think we have about 6-8 articles just on hard conversations, and another 6 or 8 articles on talking about the pros and cons of aging in place. These are just hard things to talk about, but really helpful for helping our parents go.
So what are some key elements or must-haves in a healthy, proactive family dialogue about aging and future care?
Division of labor, division of responsibility. It's not really labor. It's division of responsibilities amongst all the different players. Sometimes there isn't somebody for every responsibility, but then identifying who you're going to bring in to do it. So typically the areas of responsibility fall into financial, and that's not just paying the bills. That's making sure that you've really worked with the right professionals to make sure you've planned for your financial future and that your family knows where the limitations of that are. That is often a big deal, that parents have less money than their children thought that they did for their aging years. So I've actually assembled an advisory team. I have a doctor, a financial person, an estate attorney, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a critical care doctor. I have a lot of people I ask the questions. If you could meet with the entire family instead of just the senior, what would you ask them? What would you want them to know? And they've given me a list of questions. And so how to best support and what do people need to know is that there's deeper levels and layers to what you need to do to early on support this question. But
no, you did perfectly. That was a great answer. And you talk about the division of responsibility. I almost want to say, lean into like division of opportunity. Because if we consider it an opportunity, and we're repaying our parents, no matter how crappy of parents they were, we are still who we are because they brought us into this world and, gave us the blessing of existence. And, they did their best to raise us, and where they fell short were the areas that we got to grow and become better people, hopefully. And so, we owe it to them. I don't want to say owe it, but, it's an opportunity for us to kind of pay back the love and, the, care that we were given.
I'm going to take it one step further. There are some people for whom the past is too sensitive. It's too difficult to think about how to really show their parents that kind of involvement and respect through their aging years. I get it. That happens. What about us? We're all going to age also.
Right.
We owe it to our kids to build a better future for them so that they aren't stuck with our crises, so that they're not thinking about, oh no, what am I going to do? How am I going to possibly manage this for my parent? If we start early, if we have this plan for our kids, I already do. Many of my friends now do. We give them a gift. It is a gift of peace. They are not going to be surprised, wondering how are we going to help mom and dad later? Another problem is that kids tend to overreact. We tend to jump in and try to fix everything for our parents. And they don't want to have it fixed. So then they fight back and they bark back and they say, I don't want this. Oh. That's not a relationship where it's sustainable. If you have a relationship like that through your parents' aging journey, by the time they pass, what a relief. And we see that. I know you know people like that. I know people like that, where that was the dynamic. It doesn't have to be that way, but it requires preparation. And so that's my message for everyone. It doesn't take a lot of preparation. It just takes having the hard conversations. Open up these conversations. Do you need golden agreements to have them? Absolutely not. Do we provide a service to go through the whole gamut and give you a written and a video and everything else to sort of create a game plan? Absolutely. But there's plenty of families where you can have these conversations without golden agreements, but you can still think about it as a golden agreement where it's a family commitment, where everybody sees the future in the same way and knows their responsibilities, knows what's expected of them, plans their life to include those responsibilities instead of being asked to do things haphazardly when maybe it's not convenient. That's what golden agreements are really all about.
And do you pull more than just the parent-child relationship in there? I mean, you pull like the grandchildren in there as well, or as many generations that can be involved as possible? Is that recommended?
It depends on the family. Not all families are set up for that. I did one family. It was really nice. So this woman, her husband had already passed, and she has 2 daughters, and both of them are sole proprietor business owners. So her concern was the kids are taking her to doctor's appointments or helping her with her needs, that they would be losing income. And that was a really big concern about being a burden on her children. So 2 things came out of that. Number 1, we came up with a formula for compensation. She wanted to make sure that if her kids were going to take time away from work to help her, that she essentially was paying them both equally for their time so that they didn't feel the burden of being pulled away from their business. And then the second part is when we got into some of the granular responsibilities, she has 4 grandchildren. So we actually did pull in the social planning, in particular, because those grandchildren are still pretty young. They're in high school. But we pulled in some of the planning for social connection, social connectivity. Even if when they go off to college, the kids have agreed that there's certain days that'll be their check-in FaceTime days. And they love their grandmother. They're thrilled to do it. They're happy to be part of the program. They are a bit on the young side, but it really depends on the family.
So how do you help families honor both the wishes of the aging loved one and the needs of the caregivers?
Really, often as we age, certain things we want, we can't have. Not everybody, but things come up that are just not going to be practical. And it's too much for the caregiver to be able to handle. That's why golden agreement's being done on the earlier side, particularly in our generation. Doing it early and making sure that the wishes are actually backed up by the values. Understanding what the values are that drive those wishes will help caregivers direct their loved ones in a direction that both honors their values and promotes their safety, well-being, and health, because sometimes they are at odds. And caregiver burnout, often, not always, there's multiple kinds of reasons for caregiver burnout, but often caregiver burnout is the relentless push to maintain health and safety against the pushback of the senior. Don't touch me, or, things that make it hard to be a caregiver, create an accelerated burnout. So the first step to me is understanding those values, understanding what makes it most important. I'm going to share one other story that probably is helpful for a lot of people. I worked with another family, and we talk about, when will you give up driving? Under what circumstances would you give up? Always a conversation much easier facilitated by an outsider than inside of a family. And the respondent said, when my hands and feet fall off. Until then, I won't give up driving. And in the course of our conversation, we got down to the core value that he really didn't want to be in his he has a wonderful social routine every day, and he did not want to be in a situation where he was reliant on his children to come pick him up. That was embarrassing. There were other people in the group that were already experiencing that. To him, that was the ultimate sign of lack of dignity and independence. And that drove his "I will always, always drive" mentality. So when we got to the core value of what was behind it, we were able to come up with a system This person happens to live on the East Coast where the weather isn't as nice as it is here in California. And so the family agreed to an Uber app or a Lyft app on his phone, teach him how to use it. He agreed to use it only on really weather difficult days where it's really raining hard. He said, yes, it's a little hard to drive in the rain. Yes, it's a little hard to drive in the snow. So he agreed with the family to become familiar with using that app for independence, and that started the transition because he was at an age and at a certain other issues where not driving was going to become more important. There are ways to get to the values of what people want and avoid the conflicts that create the burnout.
So at what point in our lives should we consider formulating a golden agreement?
It's
like for ourselves
soon.
or for...
It's never too. I'm going to tell you, I have kids in their 20s. They haven't done the full golden agreements protocol, but
on the silver plan.
But what we have done is we've looked at the necessary documents and the legal documents that would make a sudden tragic event more manageable. So those documents exist, whether they're advanced care directives, whether they are access to finances to be able to help make decisions, third-party authorization agreements. I'm on all the lists as well as a sibling because I have 4 kids, but me and one of their siblings are on all of their healthcare release information releases. These are small steps you can take at any age to make this process easier for your family. Because if you have to show cause or go to court or get legal documents to then step in and help your loved ones, you're just delaying the process and creating a lot of crisis for the person who's trying to help you. Mm-hmm. All these steps can be done at any point in time. There's really, if anything, there's a too late, not a too early.
And what would be too late?
The too late is when the golden client is unable to really articulate what their needs and wants are with any substance for the family to be able to work with. That's when it's a little bit too late. So I do work with those families as well to talk about the divisions of responsibilities, to talk about all the things that can be done ahead of time to help create ease through the process. I've had conversations. I have a psychiatrist on my board who will help with capacity issues when that's necessary. Fortunately, we try to work around things like that. We don't really like to go to that end. We believe everybody has a say in their future. And the more we understand the values of those. We also do videotape. We do a lot of videotape in the end of we do the family conversation on videotape. And I ask very specific questions so that the family can go back and see what those values were when their loved one had full thoughtfulness and full capacity. Another client told her kids that if she was diagnosed with certain kinds of short diagnoses, glioblastoma, ALS, pancreatic cancer, certain very specific things that she could point to that she knew had a short ending and rather painful ending, that for her, in her value system, she really wanted her kids to know she wants them to expedite getting to that end process. She'll put it in her advanced care directives, but what a peaceful gift to give her kids on video to say, I give you permission. When these hard conversations come up with my doctors, please don't hesitate. This is what I really, really want. And what a gift. What a gift for those kids to have that kind of clarity.
I've heard it from many different people where, a dying parent will often hang on simply because they don't feel like the kids feel like they have permission to let them go, and that they feel sometimes, like, I forget where I was hearing the story that, the family was in the room constantly with the parent, and the parent just kept hanging on. And as soon as they left the room, it was like they died because they knew in their heart of hearts that now, they can just do it without having to feel like they're dragging their kids along or hurting their kids at all or making them feel guilty. And so it is important to really have those conversations early. And I think probably throughout the lifespan. I mean, from the time our kids are old enough to comprehend, we need to be having those conversations because things can happen even if we're in our 30s with kids, our 40s. We don't have to wait until we're 80, 90, 100 years old to start having a conversation about what's going to happen when I am in this situation.
If you go back in time or you look at some other cultures, multigenerational living gave young children exposure to the stages of life, all stages of life. And as they grew up, They were watching and learning, not just how to help be supportive, but how to do it right for their children later. In a post-industrialization world, in a world of globalization and spreading out, some of those lessons have been lost. And we need to figure out how to put them back into the family. And fortunately, technology makes it easier than ever. We can FaceTime the people we love. We can videotape the people we love. We can have these lasting memories. It is an art. It is a piece of learning and living that we don't get anymore. It's just a byproduct of where we are. I will share, because I've had this come up many times. People say, well, what are the Asian cultures? I hear, multigenerational living is more prevalent in other societies. I did a study on it. I wanted to understand, what are the best practices, right? I thought I was going to carry forward the best practices. And I will only say this. It does still exist. It does still exist in parts of the world more than others, but there is no one country that does it so right that we should all be looking at it. In China, for instance, the one-child policy has had a tremendous effect on multi-generational living. There's only one person out there that's their actual child to help them. And many of them have moved away from their villages and towns. And so it's become a community and government-led support. But there's no perfect solution out there. There just isn't. I do know, though, we have lost some of the lessons in family unity through the aging process.
I personally kind of miss the days when multi-generations all lived relatively close to one another. I mean, my grandparents they weren't right in Pittsburgh where I grew up, but they were like an hour away, and we got to see them pretty frequently. I had a lot of friends who, growing up in a small community with front porches, their grandparents lived with them. You knew their grandparents, and there was more than just the family involved in the aging adult. There was the community as well. And I think we've lost so much of that we've kind of distanced ourselves, and we've let ageism kind of creep into our lives a little bit more, where we're more fearful of death, and aging is so negative rather than a positive. And we don't lean into the opportunities we have to experience what our aging adults are doing.
I think you said that so well. It is nostalgia to think about the days when grandparents or great grandparents even, were doing the caretaking for the children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren. Oh, drop them off at my house. Come by later and get them. It still happens. Yeah. And definitely, but for many of us, myself included, that's just nostalgic waxing on the past or relying on movies to tell us how it was done, right? It's not true across the board, but it's a beautiful sign of life when your whole family is part of your aging journey.
Right. So can you share an example of a family promise and how it helped a family navigate a tough decision?
Yeah. Brain just got flooded, actually. With a lot of examples, because I fortunately I do hear from people about moments that are critical. The medical seems to be the obvious one to go to, but I'm going to go to something a little more basic. Here's a good one. So one family, the parents were deciding between building a bathroom downstairs and a room to live in to make their house accessible for aging in place, or moving into a spare room in their daughter's home. And this was a decision they were absolutely agonizing over. The golden agreement of the things that they had decided that they would all agree to, right? Because a golden agreement is only good if everybody agrees to it. In looking at what their children were prepared to do for them, they went through the list of the golden agreements, and instead of making the question about, do we build a bathroom or do we move in with our daughter, they reframed the entire question around which solution best honors the agreements we've made as a family. What is the easiest way to live up to what we said we want to do, rather than go with maybe our instinct about where our independence might be? Could they end up, and they did end up moving into their daughter's house. And they did so because they have an agreement too. It's not just our agreement, what we'll do for our loved ones, but it's their agreement with what they'll do to help us support them. It's a two-way street. So in this case, that golden agreement, that series of golden agreement, is actually what they were relying on as they had a hard conversation to make that difficult decision.
So what advice would you give to adult children who feel overwhelmed and don't know really where to start these conversations?
I would say go to my website. My articles are written from They're all free. It's a perspective of, we know this is a hard conversation. This is not fluff. This is, what are the important points to have a conversation around? I recommend to every family that you start from a place of compassion and care. Aging is not something that we didn't expect. It was always coming. And when we treat it as such, instead of a new burden that's been put on our life, we tend to come from a place of empathy, a place of consideration. I also say, don't try to do it alone. Bring in family members, bring in loved ones, bring in clergy, bring in a social worker, bring in a family psychologist, whatever you need. You don't have to do this alone. And sometimes it's really important to look beyond the moment and say, if I have another 20 years of helping my parent through this aging process, is this the moment that I want to define what that relationship's going to be like? Or can I make it easier? Can I just not worry? So often, I think as children of aging people, we think to ourselves, how does this impact me? I'm raising my kids. I'm doing my family. I've got my marriage. I've got my job. How is this impacting me? And guess what? Asked at the right time, most of our parents would say, I don't want to be a burden on your life. So when you start closing that gap and say, how do we do this without being a burden? How do we make this something, as you pointed out, a joyful reframe of the evolution of our relationship? That would be my advice.
And how do you address emotional resistance or family members who just don't want to talk about aging or death?
So sometimes you just can't have those conversations. Sometimes you have to let it go. It's not going to happen. But then you look at the people who are going to be left behind and you say, can we have the conversation? Sort of in levity. I don't know if your kids ever played this game, Noses, where you're at the dinner table and you say, who's going to do the dishes? And they go, noses. And the last one to put their finger on the nose is the one who's it and ends up doing the dishes. Often we look at helping our parents the same way. Noses, you do it. That's on you. You live closest, or they liked you best, or whatever we put out there. But we create this unfair expectation of one person to carry a very heavy load. So the parent really doesn't want to talk about it. These conversations that can't be had, then gather the people who can have the conversation. Talk about division of responsibility. Talk about what you know your parent needs based on your history and shared experiences. How do we support them knowing what we know are their values? And how do we treat them with respect and compassion and dignity and independence, no matter what their wishes are?
So what resources are not noses? Yeah, I don't think we ever played noses. I remember, really the conversations we had, because we had to deal with this with my mom's passing, that, she was in Maryland, I was in Oregon, I had a sister in West Virginia, one in Maryland who was closer to where my mom was living, and which sister I leave off, my sister in Oklahoma. And my sister in Oklahoma ended up carrying kind of the weight of most of the responsibilities. She was trying to get my mother to move out there with her and do some of those types of things. So I think we handled it fairly well. I was much more willing. I'm supportive of the decisions. I'm willing to give up, decisions, and trusting my younger sister to kind of make the decision she needed to make. And so we kind of had that conversation. We probably all ultimately could have done it a little bit better, and it probably would have been better to have done it much earlier than when we, really kind of realized that my mom was in worse shape. And there were a lot of issues that she had that we just couldn't have been aware of. She had a esophageal issue where she wasn't able to swallow food. And, it wasn't until we kind of learned that she was having trouble keeping food down. And then we got checked out. And really, it was almost like she'd created a stomach above her diaphragm that was holding food. And then, food wouldn't get down into the digestive tract. So she was essentially dying of malnutrition, even though, we're making sure she's getting food and all of those types of things. And so, best I could do is I was sending her protein shake, the bottled protein shakes.
Yeah.
It's like, at least get that down, get some nutrients, that can pass through the diaphragm into the stomach and at least get some nutrition down there. It's not going to be regurgitated. Because we'd even tried, we were
sending the best you could do.
Yeah, we were sending her meal, those meal plans where you can, you pick the foods that you want. And she was able to pick the different foods that she wanted. And we were just providing, at least a couple, I think we were providing maybe all 3 meals a day, or at least a couple meals a day. But we didn't know that they weren't actually doing her any good because they weren't getting into her system. But nobody knew that. Even my sister that was there with her, in the same town, couldn't have known that. So
That's right.
My mom needed to be having a little bit better conversation with us.
So that's what golden agreements are about. It's basically saying, like, in the case of first of all, my heart goes out to you and your family because that's a really difficult thing to watch somebody you love go through something that difficult. And you didn't know, and you probably feel a little bit of sadness that you didn't know. This notion of golden agreements, this notion of families coming together would be in a perfect world, which there isn't, doesn't exist. But if it did, that the person who's designated to be the healthcare power of attorney, and there's a number of responsibilities that can help you, they would know more from the doctor directly than the conduit of your mom to tell you. I often think of it kind of like spokes on a wheel. The axle is the person we're planning for, the loved one. They make that wheel turn. As long as they're alive, that wheel is turning. And all the spokes that come in are the different professionals who come into your life to help you get there. That's your doctors, that's your financial people, that's your estate attorney if you have one, that's your social worker, that's your assistance programs, that's your Medicaid. All of those things are the spokes on the wheel. And when all the spokes go directly to the axle, it actually doesn't work. There's a hub around the axle. That's what makes it work. That hub is the family. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that are closest to you. They can take in all that information and make sure it's being synthesized in the best possible way and coordinated in the best possible way to help your loved one. And that to me is the essence of what Golden Agreements is about, are the family agreements that hold that hub together to really help your loved one age and go through that journey with the most support possible. It's just rethinking how we do it.
I like that analogy. It really makes a lot of sense. And so hopefully that's not wasted on our audience as they listen to this or watch this podcast. So
I really commend you for opening up these hard conversations. It is not easy to think about aging. It is not easy to think about our loved ones ever leaving us. Easy to think about the day will come for absolutely every one of us when we can't pay our bills, or we can't tell our families what the doctor said, or we can't necessarily remember every appointment we have, or proactively think about how to do fall prevention in our house. These are all parts of aging, but we don't want to think about those parts. And but there's another way to do it.
And so what are some of the resources or tools that you would recommend for families just in the beginning process of planning for long-term care or end-of-life decisions?
First of all, again, I'll send you back to my website because I've got all kinds of information. I have a whole long glossary of terminology so that, when you're looking for somebody to come to the house to help your family member, are you looking for a companion? Are you looking for an aide? Are you looking for a nurse? Are you looking for there's a different, so there is a glossary so that when you're trying to figure out what you need, it's at least a starting place to get the language together, to know what you're asking. I'm also coming out soon. I don't know how soon, but I'm going to be coming out soon with a do-it-yourself question and answer so that you can start asking these hard questions and the right questions to organize your family. But really, I think what can you do today? What can you do now is gather consensus in your family that you're not leaving it to chance and crisis, and that you're going to build a plan. And then organically, or through a little research, or through some inspiration from the website, start having the hard conversations and not being afraid of them, really understanding that they are part of a much more peaceful future. A little planning ahead. Something that I get a lot of kickback on is, well, I don't know, what if you change your mind, or life's going to throw things at you. You don't know how do you plan for that? And I say a plan that you modify or pivot from is better than no plan. Aging is unpredictable, but planning for it isn't.
Hey, you can plan for unpredictability.
You are better off in unpredictable situations when you had a plan going into it.
So how can our listeners find and evaluate trustworthy legal, financial, healthcare resources in their area?
First of all, identifying what it is you need is always a critical first step. People say, oh my gosh, I need an estate plan. Can I just go online and download something, or do I need to talk to someone? That's really individual to the family. So for the first thing you have to do is define what it is that you think you need and what your family genuinely needs. As far as finding credible, I'm kind of old fashioned this way. Talk to the people who've done it well, people that you really respect, and say, who did you use? How did you find them? Different neighborhoods, different areas have different resources for figuring that out. There are so many professionals in this aging space, right? I'm only focusing on the family, but the number of spokes that go into that hub are so many. There's aging consultants. There are geriatric doctor. And all these resources have resources. So when you really figure out what you need and you get the team together, they're going to be able to help turn you over to the people that you need.
It sounds like you really have to kind of have some of the conversations with even outside of the hub, sort of, interact with the other hubs. What are other families doing? Who are their parents going to see for, financial consulting or legal advice and that types of things.
And
I think it becomes a little bit more difficult.
I'm gonna add on to that. Especially if your loved one has the capacity to be involved in it, start with their friends.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just start with your friends. If they know that somebody that they love and trust used somebody, they're going to feel more secure talking to that same person.
That's a good point. So in your experience, what's the biggest transformation families experience when they engage in this kind of planning?
Sense of peace. That's what I hear the most. When we're done with this plan and I deliver the package at the end, I often hear how much, whether literal or metaphorically, how much better people are sleeping at night, that they are less worried about the future. They're less influenced by what's happening to the people around them and some of the horror stories they're hearing from their friends. They feel like, I got a plan.
Does it tend to bring a little bit more unity to families, particularly like siblings, as they're kind of gathering together and maybe having hard conversations that might stir up some friction, but we know that friction often polishes the stone. So
that's right.
Is there benefits to the family that even though they might have to go through the hard conversations, that they come out of it stronger?
I think that's generally true.
I'm sure it's not always true.
It's not always true. It's not always true. So this is just one part of life. This is just one piece of it. So you can't say that having a plan is going to be the panacea to family harmony. That's not how it works. But I'll share another story because I do think your listeners will appreciate the familiarity of some of these stories in their own lives. Another woman I was working with had said to me in our private meeting first that in the event that she couldn't stay at home, and her intention was to move in with one of her sons because he had a really big house and the room for her, and that would be where she would go, because we go granular on this planning idea. And when we had our family meeting, and she has 4 children, and they were all on the video call, and I relayed her intentions if she was unable to age in place, that she would move into this big house of her son. Oh, he lost his mind. He lost his mind. And he said, Mom, I renovated my house 3 years ago. If you had planned to move into my, what's now a small living room, if you had planned to move in there, why didn't you tell me? I would have built a bathroom. I would have built a closet. I am tapped out. I am not renovating another inch of this house, and you are not moving in here. And you got a little sense of what the family dynamics going on there were, which is fine. Yeah. Not my place to judge. I just listen. The siblings were not happy. That siblings' response, that was net effect of that conversation. However, it didn't take long to actually facilitate a conversation whereby another son stepped up and said, when my daughter moves to college next year, in the event you needed to not live at home, which we hope is not what happens, if I renovated her room, would you be willing to move in there? And the family not only agreed, but that the sibling who had said, no way, not my house, agreed to help with the cost of renovating that room, because that son was really happy to have another solution. So even though I think there was a family dynamic there that I don't want to know about, I do think that there is agreement around issues related to the people we love.
Yeah, that story didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. I thought you were going to say that.
What did you think was going to happen?
Got pissed off at the guy that she planned to move in with, because why not? What's wrong with my house and this and that kind of stuff. Which
it was a surprise. This is the beauty, honestly, and this is true for everybody, all your listeners. It really helps to have a third party involved in these conversations. Some professional. Golden Agreements does it, but you can also rely on other resources, friends, like I said, clergy. Having an independent in the room for these hard conversations tends to help facilitate a better outcome when you don't get stuck in the weeds of family dynamics.
So what do you wish more people understood about aging and the role of family communication in navigating it well?
I think I'm going to let everybody off the hook for a moment. We are raised to respect our parents. We are raised to listen to them and often not question what they say. And then when we get to the aging process, to really be involved, you have no choice. So I think my recommendation is to look at this evolution of the relationship as a bonding before this leaves this earth. where you open up communication in a way you never have before, where you learn how to support that person instead of seeing it as an extrinsic on your life.
No, perfect answer. So I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to ask you the question that we ask of all of our guests. What are you doing personally to age well?
I am valuing my connections first and foremost. My connection with my children, my friends, my community, and as evidenced by the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you, I am living my dream. I am chasing dreams. I'm not afraid to dream. I have a dream. I have more than a dream, a lifelong experience to know that other people can benefit from information. Their lives can be improved, and thousands of hours of turmoil and can be replaced with a solid plan. And it puts life, it creates quality of life for others as well. So for me, that's what aging well is continuing to live my dream.
That's awesome. And where can our listeners learn more about Golden Agreements and begin this work with their own families?
I have a website, goldenagreements.com. We're on Instagram. We're a new company, so we're not all over the airwaves yet, but we're getting there. We also have a shop of curated products on the website, really focusing not on, really focusing on the essentials for aging. Something that's really important, for instance, fall prevention, something we talked about earlier. You had a guest on, was talking about his book on fall prevention. He listed a lot of things that everybody should be considering having in their life to help. I made sure every single one of those are under the category of fall prevention on the website, so you can get a sense of the products that can help. I also encourage family members that fall prevention is a group activity. Typically, it's not till it's too late that we realize we could have a grip in the shower could have prevented a fall. Thinking of those things early. Everybody wants to feel independent like they were still 18 years old, but we're not. So helping our loved ones can help maintain their independence, keep them safe in their home. There's at least a good list. There's I think an article or two, room by room, of things that you can have to improve safety, improve quality of life and convenience. So I recommend people go to the shop to get ideas, see what they need to improve the safety of the home. And my contact information is there. Goodman at goldenagreements.com. I'm here as a resource to help families put together their plans, to help them think through what needs to be. Oh, I also have another service that I want to just mention because I think that it's through the Golden Agreements process. I get to know families quite intimate in terms of their values and what's made them get to where they are and some of the wishes of the golden client. So I do offer another service called the Legacy Vault, which is just a 2-hour video where I take information from the family and we do a video recording essentially of the values of the stories that made the values that are the person today. And it's not a high quality. You can go out and get really professionally done videos but this is what I would call from the heart videos, the things that people want to share and leave for their children, their grandchildren, their great grandchildren and beyond, how they aged well, telling their story.
It's awesome. And is there anything we missed talking about that you want to share with the audience?
Let's take a look here. I want to leave your listeners with this. Believing that we're never going to die and that we can just keep pushing for longevity can really interfere with living our best life. So make sure the people you love are around you. Make sure you have those connections that make life worth it.
And keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.